like to thank you all for being patient. The committee will now reconvene, and I'd like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Seymour, I want to thank you for testifying today. I want to thank all of you for testifying. Every day, government agencies and contractors are the targets of cyber attacks. I wanted to ask you about an attack that happened in 2014. In March of last year, OPM's networks were attacked by a sophisticated cyber threat. At about the same time, USIS, a contractor for OPM that conducts background checks, was also attacked. As I understand it, the attack against OPM did not result in any breaches of personal information, but the attack against USIS did. Is that right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
So the attack on OPM, the government agency, was thwarted, but the attack on USIS, the contractor, resulted in the theft of thousands of personal records. Ms. Seymour, we want to learn from this. What protections did OPM have in place that USIS did not?
Thank you for the question, sir. Some of the protections had to do with the architecture that the government is using versus the architecture that USIS was using. Most of the government's data is in a mainframe, and in USIS they were in a distributed, more modern environment. The adversaries in today's environment are typically used to more modern technologies, and so in this case, potentially our antiquated technologies may have helped us a little bit. But I think also it comes down to culture and leadership. And one of the things that we were able to do immediately at OPM was to recognize the problem. We were able to react to it by partnering with DHS and our agencies. They're partnering agencies to be able to put mitigations in place to better protect the information.
So those kind of cyber protections that you had in place at OPM, they're expensive?
Yes, sir. Some of them can be expensive. Some of the appliances that you put on a network, firewalls and different software to separate data and to protect it so that it recognizes good traffic in the network from potentially erroneous traffic in the network, those can be expensive. They're expensive sometimes to implement and then sometimes expensive to operate and maintain.
So USIS could have saved money by not investing in those cyber protections. Is that right?
What I would offer, sir, is yes, you can save money by not implementing security, but it's a temporary savings because these vulnerabilities and the breaches that we suffer are expensive to remediate.
Right, right. So USIS is a subsidiary of a company called Integrity, and Integrity owns other subsidiaries that also do business with the federal government. On February 11, 2014, the committee held a hearing with the head of USIS. I asked him about whether Integrity oversaw these subsidiaries. And I also asked him about bonuses Integrity paid to USIS executives during a 4.5-year period when USIS allegedly perpetrated a massive fraud against the government. In response, he confirmed that Integrity, in fact, oversaw these subsidiaries and that Integrity determined those million-dollar bonuses. Since then, neither USIS nor Integrity has answered one single question we've asked them. So, Ms. Seymour, after you discovered the breach at USIS, what was the company fully cooperative in responding to the government's request for information about the cyber attack? Did they allow federal cyber officials to investigate the breach of other Integrity subsidiaries?
The government was able to negotiate with USIS to allow U.S. CERT to scan their network and uncover some of the vulnerabilities and propose remediation steps for USIS. We were limited somewhat in our ability to scan the network, or U.S. CERT was limited in its ability to scan the network, again, because of the architecture of the USIS network. So U.S. CERT was given permission to scan 2 of the subnets of that network that they identified.
Chairman's indulgence, I just have one more question. Ms. Seymour, after the breach and the discovery of the alleged, let me go back to what you just said. Were you all able to accomplish everything you wanted to accomplish with regard to USIS? I take it that you didn't get everything that you wanted.
It's difficult if, again, the way the network was architected. I can give you an example, if I might. If you ask me to physically secure an apartment building, but you only allow me to go into 2 apartments, I can't tell you what's in those other apartments.
Right.
But clearly, you know, they are part of the building that you've asked me to secure.
Yes, sir, I got it.
Okay.
So then you didn't get whatever, to answer my question, you didn't get everything you wanted.
We were not able to go to the boundaries of the network, sir.
And Ms. Seymour, after the breach and the discovery of the alleged fraud, OPM decided not to renew its contract with USIS. But I recently learned that the company may be planning legal action. Have you seen any signs that Integrity or USIS might bring a lawsuit against OPM?
I'm not privy to any of that information, sir. I have no knowledge.
So after failing to protect the personal data of tens of thousands of people, after not fully cooperating with the government after the breach, after refusing to answer Congress's questions, now Integrity may be planning to sue. There are serious questions about how Integrity has been conducting business with over $2 billion in taxpayer funds it has received. I think we should pursue answers directly from Integrity, and I will bring that up with the chairman. But, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cummings. I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes. And the first question I have is going to be to you, Mr. Scott. One, thank you for being here today. Like you, I think I've been here for 4 weeks longer than you have in this position. And having come out of the private sector most recently, trying to get our hands around what's really going on. And one of the interesting things that I find is that some very basic questions haven't been, the federal government, we haven't answered. If North Korea launched a missile in San Francisco, we know how we would respond. The North Koreans know how we would respond. That's a physical on physical attack. Then, a digital on physical attack. We have a little bit example of that Stuxnet from a couple of years ago. But what is a digital on digital attack? What reaches the level of a digital act of war? Who's having these conversations? How are we going to go about answering some of these questions? And I'd really just like your insights on those issues and how we're going to come to some resolution as a whole of government.
Well, I think those kinds of questions actually are, frankly, outside the purview of OMB. They're really national security questions and DOD kinds of questions. So in the few weeks that I've been here, I just haven't been engaged in sort of that conversation, although like you, I'm curious about the answers to those, and I do think it's policy things that are going to have to be worked out over some time. It's pretty clear to me that there are, somewhat fuzzy lines in that space.
Thank you. And one of the things that this committee as a whole, and then my subcommittee on information technology specifically, is going to be looking at the continued implementation of FSMA from 2014. And I'm interested in your thoughts on where the guidance to all the agencies and departments on implementation of FSMA is, and when can we expect some of that guidance?
Thank you for that question. So, as you know, the FSMA law passed in the 2014 year, and since then we've been taking the actual law and putting it through our OMB process in terms of figuring out what guidance we'll issue to the various federal agencies and so on. That work's well underway. So I think in the next several months, you'll see the specific guidance that we issue with regard to FSMA.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr.
And we tend to do annual updates of that. So you'll see ongoing updates as time passes as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And the next question is to you, Ms. Seymour, and follow up on some of the questions that Mr. Cummings had. You had mentioned that OPM was not allowed, or U.S. CERT, excuse me, was limited in their ability to scan the network of USIS. Why was that?
I can't answer that, sir, on behalf of USIS.
So in your role as, and this is not you specifically, but you as the CIO of OPM, do you have enough authority to mandate something like that happen?
Within my own agency, sir?
Within your own agency?
Yes, I do. I have excellent leadership with Director Archuleta, and I do feel I have appropriate authority.
What about if it comes to a subcontractor that your agency is employing?
Again, I would defer to the contracting officer, and I would work with the contracting officer to make sure that the appropriate clauses are in there, and that would guide the discussions that we would have with the contractor.
But as of right now, if you walked in and said, I want to see this part of the network scanned, I want to see, do a vulnerability assessment of a certain part of a network that's being managed by a subcontractor, you would have the authority to be able to do that.
I think that there are a lot of questions there that we would probably engage with the contracting officer and legal counsel. I would like to take that question and get you a more complete response, because I think there are a lot of factors there that play into that.
No, I appreciate that. One other issue, I know we're talking about FSMA here today, but at some point we'll probably talk about FITARA. And, I know this is something that is, was good legislation that was passed last year. I think it's pretty insane that the federal CIO doesn't have complete jurisdiction over certain elements of the networks that you are tasked to protect, and that is unfortunate. And so we'll be looking at the implementation of that, and I know Mr. Conley, my colleague, is very interested in that, since he was part of the group that passed the legislation in last cycle. So I appreciate y'all being here. And with that, I'd like to yield or recognize Mr. Conley for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair, and I thank him for his kind remarks. And by the way, I'd be glad to work with you on, we tried to actually codify the role of CIO and CTO in the federal government along the lines originally proposed by the President. We were unsuccessful in that effort the first try, and so I'd be glad to work with you, because while some of this is by executive order, but that does not necessarily survive a particular President. And I do think we need to rationalize the hierarchy of responsibility in the executive branch. And so hopefully we could work with the executive branch. This was early on, and maybe didn't have the full attention of the administration at the time. But at any rate, I'd be glad to work with the Chairman if he's interested in perhaps pursuing that legislatively. And I thank him again for his kind remarks on FITARA, although here at the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, we prefer to call it Isa Connolly. So let me start. Mr. Scott, how would you assess plans for the implementation? There are a lot of elements of the reform bill, and we, as you know, intended it not to be another pain in the neck overlay of responsibility that you've got to report and do all that. We actually want it to be transformative. We want it to be a management tool for actually achieving efficiency, helping with the management structure, and looking at different ways to harness the power of technology to transform. Could you briefly just bring us up to date from your perspective, and you're new, how well organized are we, and how sincere is the energy within OMB to, in fact, use it as such?
Thank you for the question. I think the energy level is high, and it certainly been the subject of a lot of work that my team in particular has been working on, over the last several months. Through the process that we've used, we've also had a very high level of engagement with agency CIOs, former CIOs who've had experience in the government, members of your team and others who've all, I think, provided great perspective not only on the intent of FTARA, but some of the practical aspects of implementing. Among those are not every agency is the same, and so there's cases where, flexibility is going to be needed while still retaining the absolute intent of the law, which is to have greater accountability and responsibility on the part of the CIO. We're about ready to enter a public comment period where we think we'll get additional insight on that, and so we look forward to, in a few weeks after the public comment period, closing it out and issuing our guidance. But in summary, I would say I feel really good about where we are and where we're going, and I appreciate all the support that you and your team have provided for this.
And as I indicated to you in the break while we were voting on the floor, we'd like to work with you and with you, your office as well, Ms. Seymour, in particular, about implementation and how we're doing and looking at milestones, and because we want to use oversight hearings to prod, but also to enhance and augment what you're doing. Ms. Seymour, there's a role, it seems to me, obviously, for OPM, especially in sort of helping to rationalize the current structure we have. Now, if you go to a major corporation and you ask, no matter how big, how many CIOs do you have? They look at you kind of strange and they go, well, one. Believe me, I've done this in my district. It doesn't matter how big or small, the answer is always the same, one. Now, over 24 agencies, federal agencies, we have 250 people with the title CIO. And we didn't, by fiat, say thou shalt only have one. But we created a series of incentives in the bill to give you the tool to help rationalize that system and make sure that there's one CIO vested with the authority, the responsibility, the accountability, the flexibility to help engineer these reforms. Could you comment on that? Because I got to tell you, from the private sector point of view, the federal government is not well organized. Just that anecdote about how many CIOs we got, frankly, to effectuate the kind of management change we need to be more efficient. What's OPM doing to try to take advantage of the new law in that respect? And I know my time has just expired, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the indulgence just for a second. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, sir. We work very closely, I work very closely with Mr. Scott and the CIO Council. I think that that is an avenue where we can share ideas, share lessons learned, where we can, by any other title, whether it's CIO, Director of IT, any other title, where we need to come together and share and put in place policies that we can then implement throughout the federal government. I would say that the federal government is probably more complex and diversified than most public sector companies, or private sector companies, excuse me. And so I think that we have to work together across these sectors. So in that construct, we can, and we also need to make sure that we're not just working within the CIO Council, but that we work with the other councils as well, the Chief Acquisition Officer Council and the Chief Human Capital Officer Council. And when you get the proper C-suite folks together, you really get a lot of knowledge, expertise, and leadership to move our efforts forward.
I look forward to talking more to you about that. Would the Chairman just allow either GAO or CRS or both just to comment? And I'm done, but I didn't want to shut them out because I know they have views as well, and GAO has been very supportive of FTARA, otherwise known as Isaac Conley.
Yes, sir. That is actually, that work with FTARA is actually done by another director. But one thing I would like to comment on, kind of a corollary.
If you put the mic just a little closer.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
One thing I would like to just comment as far as a corollary, we're beginning to start an engagement that will be looking at the role of CIOs, CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, and their authorities, which, while of course not necessarily pertain to FTAR and the role of the CIO, has some other interesting aspects to just what extent that the CISOs have authorities throughout their organizations and across the federal government.
Dr. Fisher?
I don't have any specific comments. I don't have any specific comments with respect to FTAR, but I'd like to say we do have people who are sort of more specifically focused on this area, and we'd be happy to follow up with you to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I do look forward to working with you over these next couple of weeks and months on FTARA and how we can make sure the federal government is doing the things that it's supposed to be doing. And I want to thank the witnesses for your appearances here today. I appreciate y'all being flexible, and this is a conversation we can sit here for the next 3 days and just scratch the surface. And I look forward to future conversations with y'all and get a little more in the nitty-gritty on these issues. And I do think that this is one of those areas where the House, the Senate, and the White House, where we can work together to make sure that we're protecting the digital infrastructure of the federal government and doing everything we can to help the private sector protect themselves. So look forward to working with y'all. And with that, if there's no further business, the committee stands adjourned.